Hi, and welcome to Business Take, the show where we give you the foolish perspective on the most important business stories of the week. I'm Dan Klein, sitting in for Jason Hellman, who's away in Japan, and joining me, as always, is Jake Mann. Jake, how are you?
Hey, good afternoon, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Missing Jason a little bit, but I'm
As am I.
expecting he's over in Japan, keeping us safe from Godzilla's.
As long as he has Bryan Cranston by his side, I'm sure he'll be fine.
And well, I don't know. That movie didn't really do it for me. But before we talk about movies, we're going to talk a little bit about television this week. And one of the subjects I cover is cable television for the Fool. And this week, the Supreme Court ruled against Areo. Areo was a service where you paid for the right to have a little tiny broadcast antenna that then gave you whatever the over-the-air channels were, your major networks, in a streaming fashion. And what the Supreme Court said is that service violated the spirit. They were essentially acting as a cable company without negotiating carriage deals. So Areo has actually been shut down. Now, the question I have for you, Jake, is how is this going to affect Dish TV, which through its Hopper service has basically the same type of service, letting people record, up to 8 days of primetime television?
Right, and that's all. That's the ultimate question here. To be frank, I disagree with the ruling. I think that Areo was simply allowing customers to access free over-the-air content that they already had the right to see. Now, obviously, because the Areo case sets a precedent, this could extend to Hopper. Now, the one thing I think that should be pointed out is Fox already receives retransmission fees from Dish, and that could ultimately be the sticking point here.
The major difference is Dish does pay retransmission fees for its basic service. So before there was a Hopper, before there was this added functionality, they had already negotiated these deals. The challenge is what the Hopper lets you do is essentially grab all of this programming in a legal fashion, because DVRs are legal, and then stream it to devices that maybe weren't intended. So much like Areo, maybe it's not technically illegal, but it does seem to violate the spirit. And I think what Dish is ultimately going to have to do is go back and negotiate some sort of deal. It's what I thought Areo should have done. Find a way
Right.
to pay them, and okay, maybe your service won't be $12 a month, but maybe it would be 24 or 36 or something that kind of makes sense.
Right. The thing that Fox seems like they're missing here is, they're going after these services, but what they're missing out on is the fact that with Areo and with Hopper, they have potentially more viewers, and they could, hopefully make more from the ads that they show. So
Well, that
that's the
brings
downside of what they're missing, I think.
that brings up another factor of Hopper, and in general, some of the Dish products is they also include technology that lets you skip commercials, which are being fought in court.
Yeah,
So
you're exactly right.
I do think there's a happy medium. Both Dish and DirecTV are trying to negotiate deals for digital only, meaning you don't need a satellite subscription, services which will provide a solution for people who don't want cable. So maybe you'll have to pay $24.99 a month to have the basic broadcast networks and maybe a couple other things. Maybe you'll be able to add ESPN in for a fee. And I think those days are coming. And where the networks are being short-sighted is that this is going to happen one way or the other. Either it's going to be a legal service, or they're going to be constantly battling illegal services the way the music industry is. Jake, any final
Yeah,
thoughts?
you're exactly right about that. I hope that Fox comes to its senses and can see the long-term picture here. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Jake. You were watching Business Take. Our next topic today is one that Jake knows a little bit more about than I do. It's should college football players be paying their athletes? Now, as a casual college football fan who went to a university, Hofstra, that no longer even has a football team, I won't pretend to be an expert, but what I will say is that if you're selling a jersey with my name and number on the back of it based on my exploits, then I damn well better be getting paid. Jake, how do you feel about it?
Well, from my standpoint, college football, it's a huge business, and the players are the employees. And I think the common argument against it is the fact that college football players receive scholarships. But most research points to the fact that usually college football players are shortchanged on their scholarships between anywhere from $200 to $6,000 a year. And but simply, I guess, what I'm trying to say is that scholarships are not a paycheck. And that's the thing that needs to be realized here. So if, well, I guess what I was going to say is that I think one solution here is to provide some sort of a stipend, maybe once a semester, to cover the difference in the scholarship and the time that the players have to spend.
Yeah, I think it has to be more direct than that. If you're a nobody lineman who, nobody's buying your merchandise, you're not a star in your own right, a scholarship might be well more than what you're worth. But if you're a star quarterback, I think there should be a direct correlation. If the university is making TV deals and selling, jerseys and other things based specifically on you, you should get a cut of that. How you figure that out, it's very challenging. And I have no problem with taking the value of the scholarship off the top. So if I'm a regular player, maybe I'm going to actually do better with the scholarship. But the second I'm above that, there has to be some revenue sharing. But Jake, do you see if it happens, will this eliminate scholarships and make some of the sort of mid-tiered programs have to go to more of a not-for-profit model?
Well, that could happen, but I think there's something else we're thinking about here is that the NCAA, they have a little-known rule that says Division I athletes can't practice longer than 20 hours a week. Sorry, so they can't practice longer than 20 hours a week. But
that seems like a lot of practice.
Well, you're right, but for example, the Northwestern case, that showed that in season those players practiced anywhere between 40 to 60 hours a week. So I think, the NCAA can do two things. They can potentially have a stipend that covers the shortfall between scholarships and the actual costs, that students have from going to school, or they could pay students the extra 20 to 40 per week, that they spend beyond the NCAA rule. So if they do that, then that could potentially cover some of the additional costs the players have. So.
Right, well, I'll make 2 points on this. First, if Northwestern is practicing that much, they really should be better. But second of all, I think this is a very slippery slope because your Johnny Manziels of the world, the fact that they're not allowed to do an autograph signing on their own or go shake hands at a car dealership, that's considered a rules violation, not kind of, directly a rules violation. We have to look at some of that and players' ability to make money. The other issue touches on all scholarships. My wife had a full scholarship to Hofstra, and every year the difference between her full scholarship, which was supposed to cover tuition plus room and board, there was always a shortfall. Now, for a struggling football player who then can't get a job, my wife worked in the French department, so that covered her shortfall. Most of these football players are forbidden from getting jobs because it looks like a booster doing a favor. So the NCAA has to deal with that. Your scholarship has to cover everything. It should cover reasonable living expenses, but I also think you've got to get paid when you're actually being used to sell things. Anyway, our next topic here on Business Take is one that is near and dear to both of our heart. Summer box office has been really lagging. It's down from last year, and part of that is because most of the most highly anticipated films are next summer. The Avengers movie, the Batman Superman movie. But we did see a bit of a bump this week with Transformers, which was awful, by the way, and way too long. But Transformers was the biggest opening of the year. Jake, do you see the possibility for the box office to be turned around, or do you think it's just the quality of the movies, or is it a long-term trend?
I don't think it's a long-term trend. I think that, it's just the timing didn't work out this year because there were a few blockbusters that got pushed back to 2015. 2015 is a huge year for movies. I mean, there's a list I have here that has just a few, but The Avengers, Star Wars Episode 7, the Mad Max reboot, Terminator 4, Fast and Furious 7, and my personal favorite, 50 Shades of Grey. Just kidding. But there's so many. So
Jake, is it becoming harder to launch a movie that actually makes money? I mean, look at something like Maleficent, which is going to do, I don't know, somewhere in the $400 to $500 million box office range globally, and at that, it's a middling success. I mean, it cost in the 200 million range to make. So, is it just becoming bigger and bigger and easier to fail? I mean, we don't have that many box office hits.
well, I think it's the main thing is the franchises, and Maleficent tied into a Disney franchise, and most of the big movies from this year will be franchises. And really, the merits of whether that will continue, that's another argument. But I think that that's why 2014 has been so weak, because most of the next installments and the major franchises will come out in 2015. So.
Do you think it's possible to launch a standalone summer movie that's not a sequel, it's not a franchise, it's not based on a product you could buy at the supermarket, it's not the M&M's movie or whatever ridiculousness is coming out next? Do you think that's even possible anymore?
Yeah, well, it's certainly possible. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, will moviegoers eventually say, okay, we're sick of these franchises, we're sick of the 10th edition of these, or, I mean, for me, Star Wars 7 through 9 should be exciting, but how much further will they go? I mean, I think eventually people might say, okay, we want some original stories here that aren't reboots or sequels.
I think Star Wars 7 through 9 is kind of a different game, just because nobody knows what the plots are going to be, and the interesting thing will be in the off-cycle years from the new Star Wars movies, which are coming out every 2 years, they're going to make standalone movies. I believe the first one's about Boba Fett, and the question is, well, basically, if Episode 7 is really good, I think the interest in a Boba Fett movie will be incredibly high. If Episode 7 is a little more, Jar Jar Binks Episode 1, Misa no think it's going to go so well.
Yeah, I mean, but we'll see, because just the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is pushing some other companies to test that out, whether it's with Fantastic Four and that universe, or the DC Comics universe as well. And I just wonder eventually, if there's so many franchises going on and there's so many sequels and reboots, if fans might just say, okay, what else do you have? What do you have that I don't know?
Well, so. let's finish with the sort of most anticipated upcoming film that's not really a sequel, though it is in the Marvel Universe. Do you think Guardians of the Galaxy is going to be a blockbuster?
When we first debated this on the Motley Fool a few months ago, I thought it would be hands down. Now, I am just hopeful, that if I'm Marvel, I'm hoping that people go because they want to know what will happen with the Avengers next summer. As far as a standalone movie, I'm not so sure, because it's so out there, it's so wacky. I don't know if people are saying, okay, Guardians of the Galaxy is my #1 movie of the fall. But if they want to see, what will happen in the Avengers, then you essentially will have to see Guardians of the Galaxy to know the plot of the next Avengers movie. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. Are people going to watch Guardians of the Galaxy for the 7 seconds after the credits that tease something about the Avengers? I have very mixed feelings. So we've debated these things before in print, and I was very wrong about the Captain America movie. I didn't think it was going to be a big hit. I thought it was going to have sort of, a slightly better run than the first one. What I didn't account for was that it was really good. It's one of my favorite movies in a long time. And I think the same thing could be said of Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I have a 10-year-old, so I see every movie that's age-appropriate for him. So we're going to see Guardians of the Galaxy. And if it's good, I will probably be able to talk some of my friends into wanting to see it. If it isn't, I don't know. I think the box office, sort of original malaise continues. Anyway, moving on to our next and final topic, we are in the midst of World Cup fever here. You can't see it, but from the waist down, I am wearing red, white, and blue, baggy pants to cheer on the U.S. as they take on Belgium today, a game which will, of course, be over by the time any of you are watching this. So hopefully we're preparing for Germany or whoever it is next. But what I want to talk to Jake about, and Jake is a sports business writer, that's his beat for The Fool, is when I watch a soccer game, the thing that's most striking to me is there are no commercials. There's no TV timeouts. They don't stop and give you 60 seconds. You know, the way when you watch an NFL or a baseball game, baseball logically between innings, football, you know, sometimes between possessions, hockey when there's a whistle. How can you possibly make money televising soccer?
Right, and that's the ultimate question. I personally think it's a problem for Major League Soccer. The average soccer match has only between 10 to 20 minutes available for commercials. That pales in comparison to the NFL or the NBA or most other major sports. FIFA has largely offset this issue with pre-game, post-game coverage, and just the fact that the World Cup is a huge global event that sponsors are willing to pay millions for. Major League Soccer doesn't have that same advantage. Now, I think one thing they could consider is extending the halftime. They could potentially think about that. They could think about commercial breaks in the middle of a half, which sounds insane, but it's not unheard of for American sports.
You mean like playing quarters rather than halves?
Yes, and that's something they could think about. Or they already have sponsorships on their jerseys, and that's obviously not a huge moneymaker in comparison to video commercials. But
it is. I think one of the differences. So when you're watching World Cup, FIFA is in the driver's seat. They control everything. All of the around the field advertising you see, which very cleverly changes, most of that money goes to FIFA. I don't know if any of it goes to ESPN, but most of it goes to FIFA. Some of it maybe goes to the host country. MLS controls everything. It's a collective whole. So the individual teams operate much like the NFL, where they can sort of pool their money. So there are some resources during an MLS game to sell, whether it's on-field advertising or, I don't know, the ball has the Skittles logo on it or whatever it's going to be. But I think overall, it is limiting. And MLS just signed a $90 million a year deal, and that's a very big increase over their previous TV deal. The problem with it is I don't see that it can go up that much, because unless you're NFL football, your deal has to be recoupable. And it's one of the things I wrote about the WWE television contract. And the WWE television contract was for a disappointing amount of money. And it was capped on the fact that the USA Network wanted to keep the programming, but they weren't going to pay more than it brought in advertising. And I think we're going to see the same thing for Major League Soccer, which, it's only doing 300,000 people a game. Maybe that bumps up a little after the World Cup, but I see a ceiling on it. Jake, do you feel the same way?
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, I think eventually it will hinge on the success of soccer here in the United States. And like you said, after the World Cup, there could be a boost. Hopefully there is. I'm a huge soccer fan. And here in Chicago, this is kind of the epicenter of soccer in the Midwest. But I think, the ultimate question is, can you bring more European players over? Can you bring more superstars that people know who they are? And then you could get more eyeballs, and then you could charge more for ads, and maybe you could think about a longer halftime or something like that.
Well, thank you for that, Jake. A shout out to Freddie Adu. Jake and I both have to go paint our faces for the big game today. You've been watching Business Take. We'll see you next week.